In the Congress, at last. The immense pavilion and the volunteers in stately array, as also the elders seated on the dais, overwhelmed me. I wondered where I should be in that vast assemblage. The presidential address was a book by itself. To read it from cover to cover was out of the question. Only a few passages were therefore read. After this came the election of the subjects committee. Gokhale took me to the committee meetings. Sir Firoz Shah had, of course, agreed to admit my resolution, but I was wondering who would put it before the subjects committee and when. For there were lengthy speeches to every resolution, all in English to boot, and every resolution had some well-known leader to back it. Mine was but a feeble pipe amongst those veteran drums, and as the night was closing in, my heart beat fast. The resolutions coming at the fag end were, so far as I can recollect, rushed through at lightning speed. Everyone was hurrying to go. It was 11 o'clock. I had not the courage to speak. I had already met Gokhale, who had looked at my resolution. So I drew near his chair and whispered to him, "Please do something for me." He said, "Your resolution is not out of my mind. You see the way they are rushing through the resolutions, but I will not allow yours to be passed over." "So we have done?" said Sir Firoz Shah Mehta. No, there is still the resolution on South Africa." "Mr. Gandhi has been waiting long," cried out Gokhale. "Have you seen the resolution?" asked Sir Firoz Shah. "Of course." "Do you like it?" "It is quite good." "Well then, let us have it, Gandhi." I read it trembling. Gokhale supported it. "Unanimously passed," cried out everyone. "You will have 5 minutes to speak to it, Gandhi," said Mr. Vacha. The procedure was far from pleasing to me. No one had troubled to understand the resolution. Everyone was in a hurry to go, and because Gokhale had seen the resolution, it was not thought necessary for the rest to see it or understand it. The morning found me worrying about my speech. What was I to say in 5 minutes? I had prepared myself fairly well, but the words would not come to me. I had decided not to read my speech, but to speak extempore. But the facility for speaking that I had acquired in South Africa seemed to have left me for the moment. As soon as it was time for my resolution, Mr. Vacha called out my name. I stood up. My head was reeling. I read the resolution somehow. Someone had printed and distributed amongst the delegates copies of a poem he had written in praise of a foreign emigration. I read the poem and referred to the grievances of the settlers in South Africa. Just at this moment, Mr. Vacha rang the bell. I was sure I had not yet spoken for 5 minutes. I did not know that the bell was rung in order to warn me to finish in 2 minutes more. I had heard others speak for half an hour or 3/4 of an hour, and yet no bell was rung for them. I felt hurt and sat down as soon as the bell was rung. But my childlike intellect thought then that the poem contained an answer to Sir Firoz Shah. There was no question about the passing of the resolution. In those days, there was hardly any difference between visitors and delegates. Everyone raised his hand, and all resolutions passed unanimously. My resolution also fared in this wise, and so lost all its importance for me. And yet the very fact that it was passed by the Congress was enough to delight my heart. The knowledge that the imprimatur of the Congress meant that of the whole country was enough to delight anyone. The Congress was over, but as I had to meet the Chamber of Commerce and various people in connection with work in South Africa, I stayed in Calcutta for a month. Rather than stay this time in a hotel, I arranged to get the required introduction for a room in the India Club. Among its members were some prominent Indians, and I looked forward to getting into touch with them and interesting them in the work in South Africa. Gokhale frequently went to this club to play billiards, and when he knew that I was to stay in Calcutta for some time, he invited me to stay with him, and I thankfully accepted the invitation, but did not think it proper to go there by myself. He waited for a day or two and then took me personally. He discovered my reserve and said, "Gandhi, you have to stay in the country, and this sort of reserve will not do. You must get into touch with as many people as possible. I want you to do Congress work." I shall record here an incident in the India Club before I proceed to talk of my stay with Gokhale. Lord Curzon held his Durbar about this time. Some Rajas and Maharajas who had been invited to the Durbar were members of the club. In the club, I always found them wearing fine Bengali dhotis and shirts and scarves. On the Durbar day, they put on trousers befitting khansamas and shining boots. I was pained and inquired of one of them the reason for the change. "We alone know our unfortunate condition. We alone know the insults we have to put up with in order that we may possess our wealth and titles," he replied. "But what about these khansama turbans and these shining boots?" I asked. "Do you see any difference between khansamas and us?" He replied and added, "They are our khansamas. We are Lord Curzon's khansamas. If I were to absent myself from the levee, I should have to suffer the consequences. If I were to attend it in my usual dress, it would be an offence. And do you think I am going to get any opportunity there of talking to Lord Curzon? Not a bit of it." I was moved to pity for this plain-spoken friend. This reminds me of another Durbar. At the time when Lord Hardinge laid the foundation stone of the Hindu University, there was a Durbar. There were Rajas and Maharajas, of course, but Pandit Malaviya ji specially invited me also to attend it, and I did so. I was distressed to see the Maharajas bedecked like women, silk pyjamas and silk achkans, pearl necklaces round their necks, bracelets on their wrists, pearl and diamond tassels on their turbans, and besides all these swords with golden hilts hanging from their waistbands. I discovered that these were insignia not of their royalty but of their slavery. I had thought that they must be wearing these badges of importance of their own free will, but I was told that it was obligatory for these Rajas to wear all their costly jewels at such functions. I also gathered that some of them had a positive dislike for wearing these jewels, and that they never wore them except on occasions like the Durbar. I do not know how far my information was correct, but whether they wear them on other occasions or not, it is distressing enough to have to attend viceregal Darbars in jewels that only some women wear. How heavy is the toll of sins and wrongs that wealth, power and prestige exact from man? From the very first day of my stay with him, Gokhale made me feel completely at home. He treated me as though I were his younger brother. He acquainted himself with all my requirements and arranged to see that I got all I needed. Fortunately, my wants were few, and I had cultivated the habit of self-help. I needed very little personal attendance. He was deeply impressed with my habit of fending for myself, my personal cleanliness, perseverance and regularity, and would often overwhelm me with praise. He seemed to keep nothing private from me. He would introduce me to all the important people that called on him. Of these, the one who stands foremost in my memory is Dr. now Sir P.C. Ray. He lived practically next door and was a very frequent visitor. This is how he introduced Dr. Ray. "This is Professor Ray, who, having a monthly salary of 800 rupees, keeps just 40 rupees for himself and devotes the balance to public purposes. He is not and does not want to get married. I see little difference between Dr. Ray as he is today and as he used to be then. His dress used to be nearly as simple as it is, with this difference, of course, that whereas it is khadi now, it used to be Indian milk cloth in those days. I felt I could never hear too much of the talks between Gokhale and Dr. Ray, as they all pertained to public good or were of educative value. At times they were painful too, containing as they did strictures on public men. As a result, some of those whom I had regarded as stalwart fighters began to look quite puny. To see Gokhale at work was as much a joy as an education. He never wasted a minute. His private relations and friendships were all for the public good. All his talks had reference only to the good of the country and was absolutely free from any trace of untruth or insincerity. India's poverty and subjection were matters of constant and intense concern to him. Various people sought to interest him in different things, but he gave every one of them the same reply: "You do the thing yourself, let me do my own work. What I want is freedom for my country. After that is won, we can think of other things. Today that one thing is enough to engage all my time and energy." His reverence for Ranade could be seen every moment. Ranade's authority was final in every matter, and he would cite it at every step. The anniversary of Ranade's death or birth, I forget which, occurred during my stay with Gokhale, who observed it regularly. There were with him then, besides myself, his friends Professor Kathawate and a sub-judge. He invited us to take part in the celebration, and in his speech he gave us his reminiscences of Ranade. He compared incidentally Ranade, Telang and Mandlik. He eulogized Telang's charming style and Mandlik's greatness as a reformer. Citing an instance of Mandlik's solicitude for his clients, he told us an anecdote as to how once, having missed his usual train, he engaged a special train so as to be able to attend the court in the interest of his client. But Ranade, he said, towered above them all as a versatile genius. He was not only a great judge, he was an equally great historian, an economist and reformer. Although he was a judge, he fearlessly attended the Congress, and everyone had such confidence in his sagacity that they unquestioningly accepted his decisions. Gokhale's joy knew no bounds as he described these qualities of head and heart which were all combined in his master. Gokhale used to have a horse carriage in those days. I did not know the circumstances that had made a horse carriage a necessity for him, and so I remonstrated with him. "Can't you make use of the tram car in going about from place to place? Is it derogatory to a leader's dignity?" Slightly pained, he said, "So you also have failed to understand me. I do not use my council allowances for my own personal comforts. I envy your liberty to go about in tram cars, but I am sorry I cannot do likewise. When you are the victim of as wide a publicity as I am, it will be difficult, if not impossible, for you to go about in a tram car. There is no reason to suppose that everything that the leaders do is with a view to personal comfort. I love your simple habits. I live as simply as I can, but some expense is almost inevitable for a man like myself." He thus satisfactorily disposed of one of my complaints, but there was another which he could not dispose of to my satisfaction. "But you do not even go out for walks," said I. "Is it surprising that you should be always ailing? Should public work leave no time for physical exercise?" "When do you ever find me free to go out for a walk?" he replied. I had such a great regard for Gokhale that I never strove with him. Though this reply was far from satisfying me, I remained silent. I believed then, and I believe even now, that no matter what amount of work one has, one should always find some time for exercise, just as one does for one's meals. It is my humble opinion that, far from taking away from one's capacity for work, it adds to it. Whilst living under Gokhale's roof, I was far from being a stay-at-home. I had told my Christian friends in South Africa that in India I would meet the Christian Indians and acquaint myself with their condition. I had heard of Babu Kalicharan Banerjee and held him in high regard. He took a prominent part in the Congress, and I had none of the misgivings about him that I had about the average Christian Indian, who stood aloof from the Congress and isolated himself from Hindus and Mussalmans. I told Gokhale that I was thinking of meeting him. He said, "What is good of your seeing him? He is a very good man, but I am afraid he will not satisfy you. I know him very well. However, you can certainly meet him if you like." I sought an appointment, which he readily gave me. When I went, I found that his wife was on her deathbed. His house was simple. In the Congress I had seen him in a coat and trousers, but I was glad to find him now wearing a Bengali dhoti and shirt. I liked his simple mode of dress, though I myself then wore a Parsi coat and trousers. Without much ado, I presented my difficulties to him. He asked, "Do you believe in the doctrine of original sin?" "I do," said I. "Well then, Hinduism offers no absolution therefrom. Christianity does." And added, "The wages of sin is death, and the Bible says that the only way of deliverance is a surrender unto Jesus." I put forward Bhakti Marga, the path of devotion of the Bhagavad Gita, but to no avail. I thanked him for his goodness. He failed to satisfy me, but I benefited by the interview. During these days I walked up and down the streets of Calcutta. I went to most places on foot. I met Justice Mittal and Sir Gurudas Banerjee, whose help I wanted in my work in South Africa. And about this time I met Raja Sir Pyari Mohan Mukherjee. Kalicharan Banerjee had spoken to me about the Kali temple, which I was eager to see, especially as I had read about it in books. So I went there one day. Justice Mittal's house was in the same locality, and I therefore went to the temple on the same day that I visited him. On the way, I saw a stream of sheep going to be sacrificed to Kali. Rows of beggars lined the lane leading to the temple. There were religious mendicants too, and even in those days I was sternly opposed to giving alms to sturdy beggars. A crowd of them pursued me. One of such men was found seated on a veranda. He stopped me and accosted me. "Whither are you going, my boy?" I replied to him. He asked my companion and me to sit down, which we did. I asked him, "Do you regard this sacrifice as religion?" "Who would regard killing of animals as religion?" "Then why don't you preach against it?" "That is not my business. Our business is to worship God." "But could you not find any other place in which to worship God?" "All places are equally good for us. The people are like a flock of sheep, following where leaders lead them. It is no business of us sadhus." We did not prolong the discussion, but passed on to the temple. We were greeted by rivers of blood. I could not bear to stand there. I was exasperated and restless. I have never forgotten that sight. That very evening I had an invitation to dinner at the party of Bengali friends. There I spoke to a friend about this cruel form of worship. He said, "The sheep don't feel anything. The noise and the drum beating there deaden all sensation of pain." I could not swallow this. I told him that if the sheep had speech, they would tell a different tale. I felt that the cruel custom ought to be stopped. I thought of the story of Buddha, but I also saw that the task was beyond my capacity. I hold today the opinion as I held then. To my mind, the life of a lamb is no less precious than that of a human being. I should be unwilling to take the life of a lamb for the sake of the human body. I hold that the more helpless a creature, the more entitled it is to protection by man from the cruelty of a man. But he who has not qualified himself for such service is unable to afford to it any protection. I must go through more self-purification and sacrifice before I can hope to save these lambs from this unholy sacrifice. Today I think I must die pining for this self-purification and sacrifice. It is my constant prayer that there may be born on earth some great spirit, man or woman, fired with divine pity, who will deliver us from this heinous sin, save the lives of the innocent creatures, and purify the temple. How is it that Bengal, with all its knowledge, intelligence, sacrifice, and emotion, tolerates this slaughter? The terrible sacrifice offered to Kali in the name of religion enhanced my desire to know Bengali life. I had read and heard a good deal about the Brahmo Samaj. I knew something about the life of Pratap Chandra Mazumdar. I had attended some of the meetings addressed by him. I secured the life of Keshav Chandra Sen, read it with great interest, and understood the distinction between Sadharan Brahmo Samaj and Adi Brahmo Samaj. I met Pandit Shivanath Shastri and in company with Professor Kathavati went to see Maharshi Devendranath Tagore, but as no interviews with him were allowed then, we could not see him. We were, however, invited to a celebration of the Brahmo Samaj held at his place, and there we had the privilege of listening to fine Bengali music. Ever since, I have been a lover of Bengali music. Having seen enough of the Brahmo Samaj, it was impossible to be satisfied without seeing Swami Vivekananda. So with great enthusiasm I went to Belur Mutt, mostly or maybe all the way, on foot. I loved the sequestered sight of the Mutt. I was disappointed and sorry to be told that the Swami was at his Calcutta house lying ill and could not be seen. I then ascertained the place of residence of Sister Nivedita and met her in a Chauringi mansion. I was taken aback by the splendor that surrounded her, and even in our conversation there was not much meeting ground. I spoke to Gokhale about this, and he said he did not wonder that there could be no point of contact between me and a volatile person like her. I met her again at Mr. Pestonji Padshah's place. I happened to come in just as she was talking to his old mother, and so I became an interpreter between the two. In spite of my failure to find any agreement with her, I could not but notice and admire her overflowing love for Hinduism. I came to know of her books later. I used to divide my day between seeing and leading people in Calcutta regarding their work in South Africa and visiting and studying the religious and public institutions of the city. I once addressed a meeting, presided over by Dr. Malik, on the work of the Indian Ambulance Corps in the Boer War. My acquaintance with the Englishmen stood me in good stead on this occasion too. Mr. Saunders was ill then, but rendered me as much help as in 1896. Gokhale liked this speech of mine, and he was very glad to hear Dr. Ray praising it. Thus my stay under the roof of Gokhale made my work in Calcutta very easy, brought me into touch with the foremost Bengali families, and was the beginning of my intimate contact with Bengal. I must needs skip over many a reminiscence of this memorable month. Let me simply mention my flying visit to Burma and the Fungis there. I was pained by their lethargy. I saw the golden pagoda. I did not like the innumerable little candles burning in the temple, and the rats running about the sanctum brought to my mind thoughts of Swami Dayanand's experience at Morvi. The freedom and energy of the Burmese women charmed just as the indolence of the men pained me. I also saw during my brief sojourn that just as Bombay was not India, Rangoon was not Burma, and that just as we in India have become commission agents of English merchants, even so in Burma have we combined with the English merchants in making the Burmese people our commission agents. On my return from Burma, I took leave of Gokhale. The separation was a wrench, but my work in Bengal, or rather Calcutta, was finished, and I had no occasion to stay any longer. Before settling down, I had thought of making a tour through India traveling third class and of acquainting myself with the hardships of third class passengers. I spoke to Gokhale about this. To begin with, he ridiculed the idea, but when I explained to him what I hoped to see, he cheerfully approved. I planned to go first to Benares to pay my respects to Mrs. Besant, who was then ill. It was necessary to equip myself anew for the third-class tour. Gokhale himself gave me a metal tiffin box and got it filled with sweet balls and puris. I purchased a canvas bag worth 12 annas and a long coat made of chaya wool. The bag was to contain this coat, a dhoti, a towel and a shirt. I had a blanket as well to cover myself with and a water jug. Thus equipped, I set forth on my travels. Gokhale and Dr. Ray came to the station to see me off. I had asked them both not to trouble to come, but they insisted. I should not have come if you had gone first class, but now I had to, said Gokhale. No one stopped Gokhale from going on to the platform. He was in his silk turban, jacket and dhoti. Dr. Ray was in his Bengali dress. He was stopped by the ticket collector, but on Gokhale telling him that he was his friend, he was admitted. Thus, with their good wishes, I started on my journey. The journey was from Calcutta to Rajkot, and I planned to halt at Benares, Agra, Jaipur and Palanpur en route. I had not the time to see any more places than these. In each city, I stayed one day and put up in dharmashalas or with pandas like the ordinary pilgrims, excepting at Palanpur. So far as I can remember, I did not spend more than rupees 31, including the train fare, on this journey. In travelling third class, I mostly preferred the ordinary to the mail trains, as I knew that the latter were more crowded and the fares in them higher. The third class compartments are practically as dirty and the closet arrangements as bad today as they were then. There may be a little improvement now, but the difference between the facilities provided for the first and the third classes is out of all proportion to the difference between the fares for the two classes. Third class passengers are treated like sheep and their comforts are sheep's comforts. In Europe, I travelled third and only once first, just to see what it was like, but there I noticed no such difference between the first and the third classes. In South Africa, class comforts are better than here. In parts of South Africa, third class compartments are provided with sleeping accommodation and cushioned seats. The accommodation is also regulated so as to prevent overcrowding, whereas here I have found the regulation limit usually exceeded. The indifference of railway authorities to the comforts of the third class passengers, combined with the dirty and inconsiderate habits of the passengers themselves, makes third class travelling a trial for a passenger of cleanly ways. These unpleasant habits commonly include throwing of rubbish on the floor of the compartment, smoking at all hours and in all places, betel and tobacco chewing, converting of the whole carriage into a spittoon, shouting and yelling, and using foul language, regardless of the convenience or comfort of fellow passengers. I have noticed little difference between my experience of third class traveling in 1902 and that of my unbroken third class tours from 1915 to 1919. I can think of only one remedy for this awful state of things, that educated men should make a point of traveling third class and reforming the habits of the people, as also of never letting the railway authorities rest in peace, sending in complaints wherever necessary, never resorting to bribes or any unlawful means for obtaining their own comforts, and never putting up with infringements of rules on the part of anyone concerned. This, I am sure, would bring about considerable improvement. My serious illness in 1918-1919 has unfortunately compelled me practically to give up third class traveling, and it has been a matter of constant pain and shame to me, especially because the disability came at a time when the agitation for the removal of the hardships of third class passengers was making fair headway. The hardship of poor railway and steamship passengers, accentuated by their bad habits, the undue facilities allowed by government to foreign trade, and such other things, make an important group of subjects, worthy to be taken up by one or two enterprising and persevering workers who could devote their full time to it. But I shall leave the third class passengers at that and come to my experience in Benares. I arrived there in the morning. I had decided to put up with a panda. Numerous Brahmins surrounded me as soon as I got out of the train, and I selected one who struck me to be comparatively cleaner and better than the rest. It proved to be a good choice. There was a cow in the courtyard of his house, and an upper story where I was given a lodging. I did not want to have any food without ablution in the Ganges in the proper orthodox manner. The panda made preparations for it. I had told him beforehand that on no account could I give him more than a rupee and 4 annas as dakshina, and that he should therefore keep this in mind while making the preparations. The panda readily assented. "Be the pilgrim rich or poor," said he, "the service is the same in every case, but the amount of dakshina we receive depends upon the will and the ability of the pilgrim." I did not find that the panda at all abridged the usual formalities in my case. The puja was over at 12 o'clock, and I went to the Kashi Vishwanath temple for darshan. I was deeply pained by what I saw there. When practicing as a barrister in Bombay in 1891, I had occasion to attend a lecture in pilgrimage to Kashi in the Prardhana Samaj Hall. I was therefore prepared for some measure of disappointment. But the actual disappointment was greater than I had bargained for. The approach was through a narrow and a slippery lane. Quiet there was none. The swarming flies and the noise made by the shopkeepers and pilgrims were perfectly insufferable. Where one expected an atmosphere of meditation and communion, it was conspicuous by its absence. One had to seek that atmosphere in oneself. I did observe devout sisters who were absorbed in meditation, entirely unconscious of the environment. But for this the authorities of the temple could scarcely claim any credit. The authorities should be responsible for creating and maintaining about the temple a pure, sweet and serene atmosphere, physical as well as moral. Instead of this, I found a bazaar where cunning shopkeepers were selling sweets and toys of the latest fashion. When I reached the temple, I was greeted at the entrance by a stinking mass of rotten flowers. The floor was paved with fine marble, which was however broken by some devotee innocent of aesthetic taste, who had set it with rupees, serving as an excellent receptacle for dirt. I went near the Jnanavapi, well of knowledge. I searched here for God, but failed to find him. I was not therefore in a particularly good mood. The surroundings of the Jnanavapi too I found to be dirty. I had no mind to give any dakshina, so I offered a pie. The panda in charge got angry and threw away the pie. He swore at me and said, "This insult will take you straight to hell." This did not perturb me. "Maharaj," said I, "whatever fate has in store for me, it does not behove one of your class to indulge in such language. You may take this pie if you like, or you will lose that too." "Go away," he replied, "I don't care for your pie," and then followed a further volley of abuse. I took up the pie and went my way, flattering myself that the Brahman had lost a pie and I had saved one. But the Maharaj was hardly the man to let the pie go. He called me back and said, "All right, leave the pie here. I would rather not be as you are. If I refuse your pie, it will be bad for you." I silently gave him the pie and, with a sigh, went away. Since then I have twice been to Kashi Vishwanath, but that has been after I had already been afflicted with the title of Mahatma, and experiences such as I have detailed above had become impossible. People eager to have my darshan would not permit me to have a darshan of the temple. The woes of Mahatmas are known to Mahatmas alone. Otherwise the dirt and the noise were the same as before. If anyone doubts the infinite mercy of God, let him have a look at these sacred places. How much hypocrisy and irreligion does the Prince of Yogis suffer to be perpetrated in his holy name? He proclaimed long ago, "Ye yatha mam prapadyante tans tadhaiva bhajamyaham." Whatever a man sows, that shall he reap. The law of karma is inexorable and impossible of evasion. There is thus hardly any need for God to interfere. He laid down the law and, as it were, retired. After this visit to the temple, I waited upon Mrs. Besant. I knew that she had just recovered from an illness. I sent in my name. She came at once. As I wished only to pay my respects to her, I said, "I am aware that you are in delicate health. I only wanted to pay my respects. I am thankful that you have been good enough to receive me in spite of your indifferent health. I will not detain you any longer." So saying, I took leave of her. Gokhale was very anxious that I should settle down in Bombay, practice at the bar, and help him in public work. Public work in those days meant Congress work, and the chief work of the institution which he had assisted to found was carrying on the Congress administration. I liked Gokhale's advice, but I was not overconfident of success as a barrister. The unpleasant memories of past failure were yet with me, and I still hated as poison the use of flattery for getting briefs. I therefore decided to start work first at Rajkot. Kevalram Mavji Dave, my old well-wisher, who had induced me to go to England, was there, and he started me straight away with 3 briefs. 2 of them were appeals before the judicial assistant to the political agent in Kathiawad, and one was an original case in Jamnagar. This last was rather important. On my saying that I could not trust myself to do it justice, Kevalram Dave exclaimed, "Winning or losing is no concern of yours. You will simply try your best, and I am of course there to assist you." The counsel on the other side was the late Sergeant Samarth. I was fairly well prepared. Not that I knew much of Indian law, but Kevalram Dave had instructed me very thoroughly. I had heard friends say, before I went out to South Africa, that Sir Firoz Shah Mehta had the law of evidence at his fingertips, and that was the secret of his success. I had borne this in mind, and during the voyage had carefully studied the Indian Evidence Act with commentaries thereon. There was, of course, also the advantage of my legal experience in South Africa. I won the case and gained some confidence. I had no fear about the appeals, which were successful. All this inspired a hope in me that, after all, I might not fail even in Bombay. But before I set forth the circumstances in which I decided to go to Bombay, I shall narrate my experience of the inconsiderateness and ignorance of English officials. The judicial assistant's coat was peripatetic. He was constantly touring, and vakils and their clients had to follow him wherever he moved his camp. The vakils would charge more whenever they had to go out of headquarters, and so the clients had naturally to incur double the expenses. The inconvenience was no concern of the judge. The appeal of which I am talking was to be heard at Veraval, where plague was raging. I have a recollection that there were as many as 50 cases daily in the place, with a population of 5,500. It was practically deserted, and I put up in a deserted dharmashala at some distance from the town. But where the clients to stay? If they were poor, they had simply to trust themselves to God's mercy. A friend who also had cases before the court had wired that I should put in an application for the camp to be moved to some other station because of the plague at Veraval. On my submitting the application, the Sahib asked me, "Are you afraid?" I answered, "It is not a question of my being afraid. I think I can shift for myself, but what about the clients?" "The plague has come to stay in India," replied the Sahib. "Why fear it? The climate of Veraval is lovely." The Sahib lived far away from the town in a palatial tent pitched on the seashore. Surely people must learn to live thus in the open. It was no use arguing against this philosophy. The Sahib told his Shirastedar, "Make a note of what Mr. Gandhi says and let me know if it is very inconvenient for the vakils or the clients." The Sahib, of course, had honestly done what he thought was the right thing. But how could the man have an idea of the hardships of poor India? How was he to understand the needs, habits, idiosyncrasies and customs of the people? How was one accustomed to measure things in golden sovereigns all at once to make calculations in tiny bits of copper? As the elephant is powerless to think in the terms of the ant, in spite of the best intentions in the world, even so is the Englishman powerless to think in terms of or legislate for the Indian. But to resume the thread of story, in spite of my successes, I had been thinking of staying on in Rajkot for some time longer, when one day Kevalram Dave came to me and said, "Gandhi, we will not suffer you to vegetate here. You must settle in Bombay." "But who will find work for me there?" I asked. "Will you find the expenses?" Yes, I will," said he. "We shall bring you down here sometimes as a big barrister from Bombay, and drafting work we shall send you there. It lies with us vakils to make or mar a barrister. You have proved your worth in Jamnagar and Veraval, and I have therefore not the least anxiety about you. You are destined to do public work, and we will not allow you to be buried in Kathiawad. So tell me when you will go to Bombay." "I am expecting a remittance from Natal. As soon as I get it, I will go," I replied. The money came in about 2 weeks, and I went to Bombay. I took chambers in Payne, Gilbert and Sayani's offices, and it looked as though I had settled down. Though I had hired chambers in the fort and a house in Girgaon, God would not let me settle down. Scarcely had I moved into my new house when my second son, Manilal, who had already been through an acute attack of smallpox some years back, had a severe attack of typhoid combined with pneumonia and signs of delirium at night. The doctor was called in. He said medicine would have little effect, but eggs and chicken broth might be given with profit. Manilal was only 10 years old. To consult his wishes was out of the question. Being his guardian, I had to decide. The doctor was a very good Parsi. I told him that we were all vegetarians, and that I could not possibly give either of the two things to my son. Would he therefore recommend something else? Your son's life is in danger, said the good doctor. We could give him milk diluted with water, but that will not give him enough nourishment. As you know, I am called in by many Hindu families and they do not object to anything I prescribe. I think you will be well advised not to be so hard on your son. What you say is quite right, said I. As a doctor, you could not do otherwise. But my responsibility is very great. If the boy had been grown up, I should certainly have tried to ascertain his wishes and respected them. But here I have to think and decide for him. To my mind, it is only on such occasions that a man's faith is truly tested, rightly or wrongly. It is part of my religious conviction that man may not eat meat, eggs and the like. There should be a limit even to means of keeping ourselves alive. Religion, as I understand it, does not permit me to use meat or eggs for me or mine even on occasions like this, and I must therefore take the risk that you say is likely. But I beg of you one thing. As I cannot avail myself of your treatment, I propose to try some hydropathic remedies which I happen to know. But I shall not know how to examine the boy's pulse, chest, lungs, etc. If you will kindly look in from time to time to examine him and keep me informed of his condition, I shall be grateful to you. The good doctor appreciated my difficulty and agreed to my request. Though Manilal could not have made his choice, I told him what had passed between the doctor and myself and asked him his opinion. Do try your hydropathic treatment, he said. I will not have eggs or chicken broth. This made me glad, though I realized that if I had given him either of these, he would have taken it. I knew Kuhne's treatment. I had tried it too. I knew as well that fasting also could be tried with profit. So I began to give Manilal hip baths according to Kuhne, never keeping him in the tub for more than 3 minutes, and kept him on orange juice mixed with water for 3 days. But the temperature persisted, going up to 104. At night he would be delirious. I began to get anxious. What would people say of me? What would my elder brother think of me? Could we not call in another doctor? Why not have an Ayurvedic physician? What right had the parents to inflict their fads on their children? I was haunted by thoughts like these. Then a contrary current would start. God would surely be pleased to see that I was giving the same treatment to my son as I would give myself. I had faith in hydropathy and little faith in allopathy. The doctors could not guarantee recovery. At best, they could experiment. The thread of life was in the hands of God. Why not trust it to Him and in His name go on with what I thought was the right treatment? My mind was torn between these conflicting thoughts. It was night. I was in Manilal's bed, lying by his side. I decided to give him a wet sheet pack. I got up, wetted a sheet, wrung the water out of it and wrapped it about Manilal, keeping only his head out, and then covered him with 2 blankets. To the head I applied a wet towel. The whole body was burning like hot iron and quite parched. There was absolutely no perspiration. I was sorely tired. I left Manilal in the charge of his mother and went out for a walk on Chowpatty to refresh myself. It was about 10 o'clock. Very few pedestrians were out. Plunged in deep thought, I scarcely looked at them. My honor is in thy keeping, O Lord, in this hour of trial. I repeated to myself. Ramanama was on my lips. After a short time I returned, my heart beating within my breast. No sooner had I entered the room than Manilal said, "You have returned, Bapu?" "Yes, darling. Do please pull me out, I am burning." "Are you perspiring, my boy?" "I am simply soaked. Do please take me out." I felt his forehead. It was covered with beads of perspiration. The temperature was going down. I thanked God. "Manilal, your fever is sure to go now. A little more perspiration and then I will take you out." Pray no, do deliver me from this furnace. Wrap me some other time if you like. I just managed to keep him under the pack for a few minutes more by diverting him. The perspiration streamed down his forehead. I undid the pack and dried his body. Father and son fell asleep in the same bed, and each slept like a log. Next morning, Manilal had much less fever. He went on thus for 40 days on diluted milk and fruit juices. I had no fear now. It was an obstinate type of fever, but it had been got under control. Today, Manilal is the healthiest of my boys. Who can say whether his recovery was due to God's grace or to hydropathy or to careful dietary and nursing? Let everyone decide according to his own faith. For my part, I was sure that God had saved my honor, and that belief remains unaltered to this day. Manilal was restored to health, but I saw that Girgam house was not habitable. It was damp and ill-lighted. So, in consultation with Sri Rava Shankar Jagjivan, I decided to hire some well-ventilated bungalow in a suburb of Bombay. I wandered about in Bandra and Santa Cruz. The slaughterhouse in Bandra prevented our choice falling there. Ghatkopar and places near it were too far from the sea. At last we hit upon a fine bungalow in Santa Cruz, which we hired as being the best from the point of view of sanitation. I took a first-class season ticket from Santa Cruz to Church Gate and remember having frequently felt a certain pride in being the only first-class passenger in my compartment. Often I walked to Bandra in order to take the fast train from there direct to Church Gate. I prospered in my profession better than I had expected. My South African clients often entrusted me with some work, and it was enough to enable me to pay my way. I had not yet succeeded in securing any work in the High Court, but I attended the moot that used to be held in those days, though I never ventured to take part in it. I recall Jamiyat Ram Nanabhai taking a prominent part. Like other fresh barristers, I made a point of attending the hearing of cases in the High Court more. I am afraid for enjoying the soporific breeze coming straight from the sea than for adding to my knowledge. I observed that I was not the only one to enjoy this pleasure. It seemed to be the fashion and therefore nothing to be ashamed of. However, I began to make use of the High Court library and make fresh acquaintances, and felt that before long I should secure work in the High Court. Thus, whilst on the one hand I began to feel somewhat at ease about my profession, on the other hand, Gokhale, whose eyes were always on me, had been busy making his own plans on my behalf. He peeped in at my chambers twice or thrice every week, often in company with friends whom he wanted me to know, and he kept me acquainted with his mode of work. But it may be said that God has never allowed me any of my own plans to stand. He has disposed them in his own way. Just when I seemed to be settling down as I had intended, I received an unexpected cable from South Africa. Chamberlain expected here. Please return immediately. I remembered my promise and cabled to say that I should be ready to start the moment they put me in funds. They promptly responded. I gave up the chambers and started for South Africa. I had an idea that the work there would keep me engaged for at least a year, so I kept the bungalow and left my wife and children there. I believed then that enterprising youths who could not find an opening in the country should emigrate to other lands. I therefore took with me 4 or 5 such youths, one of whom was Maganlal Gandhi. The Gandhis were and are a big family. I wanted to find out all those who wished to leave the trodden path and venture abroad. My father used to accommodate a number of them in some state service. I wanted them to be free from this spell. I neither could nor would secure other service for them. I wanted them to be self-reliant. But as my ideals advanced, I tried to persuade these youths also to conform their ideals to mine, and I had the greatest success in guiding Maganlal Gandhi. But about this later. The separation from wife and children, the breaking up of a settled establishment, and the going from the certain to the uncertain, all this was for a moment painful. But I had inured myself to an uncertain life. I think it is wrong to expect certainties in this world, where all else but God, that is truth, is an uncertainty. All that appears and happens about and around us is uncertain, transient. But there is a supreme being hidden therein as a certainty, and one would be blessed if one could catch a glimpse of that certainty and hitch one's wagon to it. The quest for that truth is the summum bonum of life. I reached Durban not a day too soon. There was work waiting for me. The date for the deputation to wait on Mr. Chamberlain had been fixed. I had to draft the memorial to be submitted to him and accompany the deputation.